Sure. Got it. Okay. Oh, I've got a little box there now. I wonder if that's going to disappear when I click a button. All right. So thank you all for joining me today. I'm going to be focusing a lot today on getting your employees to take responsibility for what they are doing during their working day, because that is probably the key thing that you need in order to get them functioning as an independent person. So let me give you a little bit of an introduction to myself and add on to some of the bits that Jenny has just mentioned to you there. So People Building, my organisation, we provide mental health support and resources for employees, and we have an online platform of, let me just get rid of that, there we go, of articles, videos, and all different sorts of things that help a team maintain mental and emotional wellness. It's a cost-effective, proactive way to address mental health in the workplace, and to know that you've really got that box ticked. We provide unlimited free consultations for reactive solutions during times of crisis, and those do not need to be work-related crisis. As we well know as employers, sometimes your employees have stuff that happens in their home life, and like it or not, it is going to have an impact on their attitude, their performance, or just how they're feeling at work. And that's really where we come in and provide quite an elite service, because we're able to offer free consultations to all employees, whether the stuff that they've got going on is concerns at home or concerns at work. They can reach out to us and we can begin to put together a plan of action to move them past those troubles. We also use NHS approved assessments that measure and provide evidence of the effectiveness of what we then do in the sessions with people. And they can be used by your HR team to support, or, if you've got challenges with employees, then those kind of medical grade questionnaires are going to be able to help you assess what the next step should be for those employees. So let me tell you a bit about me. I am a trainer of Neurolinguistic programming, or NLP for short, which is an alternative to something like cognitive behavior therapy. My expertise is in mental and emotional well-being, and as well as running the organisations that I have, I still work with clients myself as well on a one-to-one basis, providing them with support and guidance when they might need it. So I am also a franchisor of an organisation called NLP for Kids, where I have a team of practitioners who specialise in working with children and young people around their mental and emotional well-being. And so for them, we help them access schools to provide support there, and we also make sure that they've got all the techniques that they might need for working with families and parents as well. So I'm an entrepreneur and a content creator. One of my favorite platforms is YouTube, and I have various different YouTube channels for the different companies and organizations that I work with. I'm a podcaster as well as an author, and have 2 books under my belt at the moment. But most importantly, in respect of the reason why I'm here today, I am an employer, and I'm also an employer of 2 brand new Kickstarters. They've actually been with me for about 6 weeks now, but there are, of course, certain challenges that I'm aware of when it comes to working with employees, and some additional challenges that come with working with those on the Kickstart scheme. And one of the key ones is helping them to develop the confidence and attitude that they need to be able to work independently and take full responsibility in the job that they're doing. And that's what I'm going to be talking to you about today. So let's talk then about responsibility. I'm going to give you some strategies in the webinar today, but a lot of what I share with you is coming from a very practical place, with some years of experience of employing people under my belt, that I will be sharing with you, so that you've got some things that you can go and immediately start putting into action with your Kickstarters. So in terms of what responsibility is, this is a dictionary definition for you here. It is the state or fact of being accountable or to blame for something. And I felt that that was an interesting definition to share with you, because when we talk about responsibility, it's not just about taking control and taking charge of the things that you need to do, it's also about taking the blame if those things then do not work out the way in which they were supposed to. And one of the things that I will be touching on here today is that for us as employers, whilst we may not want to deliberately cultivate an environment where people are concerned with blame, or that blame is being placed, in taking responsibility and encouraging people to take responsibility for things, there is quite a formal way in which we do that, and that's via our policies. So we'll be talking about those in a little while. All right, so here are just some kind of quick fire ideas, and then some of these I'm going to drill down into in a bit more detail and give you some real life examples of how I use these and put them into practice. So quick fire ideas on getting your employees to be independent and to take responsibility. Number one, give them timesheets to follow. So quite a lot of our young people have just come out of an education environment. And one of the ways in which they are already cultivated and used to operating is by following some kind of timetable. Think about it. When they were in school, they had a timetable of lessons that they needed to attend. It told them what lesson they were going to, where they needed to go to do the lesson, and how long that lesson was going to be. If they've just come out of college or university, they will have had a similar timetable in place. They've also been encouraged at exam times to create a revision timetable or a study timetable. So again, they have it very clearly mapped out for them. This is what you're doing. This is when you're doing it, and this is how long you are doing it for. So they have been groomed to work well in an environment where timings are already set for them. And even though you may have brought your new employee in and been very, very clear about the job description, it's easy for them to get lost, maybe to get bogged down in certain details with something, or if they get stuck on something else, to end up spending far too much time on it, or if they were enjoying something a lot, to end up spending too much time on it, or just to get distracted. So a really useful thing for these Kickstarters that are coming into your businesses is to give them timesheets to follow. It's something that they're already used to doing, and it's going to be a way for you to ensure that they know how much time they need to be spending on what things, and also what order and sequence they need to be doing things in as well. All right, next one is to teach them with a multimedia approach. Now, here's what I mean by this. We all have different preferences in respect of how we learn and take in information. And this, on the bare bones, comes down to how we use our senses. So human beings are sensory beings, which means that in order for us to take information in through the world, we do so through our five senses. We're either seeing it, hearing it, smelling it, tasting it, or feeling it. And that's it. That's the only 5 ways we get the information from the outside world into our brains. Now, what starts to happen as we grow and develop is we may have a preference for taking in new information via one of those senses more so than the others. So for example, for me, I am a highly visual person. If you want to explain something to me, you need to show it to me. I need to see it. If I can't see it or I can't imagine it, then it's really difficult for me to wrap my head around it. For other people, they learn best by being talked through the instructions. They need to hear about it. When they hear about it, the information goes in and they're able to follow the instructions. Some people absolutely have to do it. Like, they're not going to get it until you give them an experience of doing that thing. So that's what we would refer to as kinesthetic. It's when you need to kind of get your hands in and get dirty and do the touchy-feely stuff. So some people need that approach to be able to learn stuff. And then with the smelling and tasting, obviously it's going to somewhat depend on your industry, but I'm going to assume for now that those ones aren't quite so relevant. Maybe if you're running a restaurant, they might be. And then there is actually a sort of secret special sixth sense as well. And I'm not talking about your sixth sense in terms of telepathy or anything like that. But what I'm referring to here is something called auditory digital, or AD for short. And auditory digital relates to language. It's not actually one of the senses that we're born with, because when we're born, we don't have language. We're not born with language. It's something we learn and develop later. But auditory digital relates to things like analyzing and strategizing and going through the steps. So it's a much more technical way of doing and understanding things, and it typically relates to language. If you have ever read the fine print in an insurance policy, that's written by someone who's very auditory digital. It's all about the facts, and it's very sequence based, and there isn't really any emotional content in there whatsoever. So that's what auditory digital looks like. That could mean, if we're thinking about a multimedia approach, that that's the kind of person who needs to see the textbook. That's the person who needs to read the instructions. We all know someone, don't we, who doesn't like to read the instructions. When they get a new piece of furniture from IKEA, 20 years later, it's still sitting there in the box because they've not been able to put the thing together. They'll blame the equipment, they'll blame the fact that, you know, it hasn't been well built. Really, it just comes down to the fact they didn't read the instructions. So we do need those instruction-led people in our lives who are not just going to wing it or, you know, visually see how it needs to be put together, but who are actually going to follow the step-by-step instructions that are there. So it might be that your employee has a preference for learning in a particular way. If you can figure out what that is, you can make sure that you can continue to teach them in that way with everything else that you need to teach them in the future. But I guess the most important thing to recognize is that you might have 2 or more employees that come on at the same time who have different styles for being able to learn. And so that's why you need a multimedia approach, so that if they prefer to learn more by watching, they have an opportunity to do that. But if they like to learn more by reading the manual, they have an opportunity to do that. And if they like to learn more by getting in and getting their hands dirty, they also have an opportunity to do that. All right, so we are going to check in on how they are doing, and we're going to make them accountable for doing what they need to do. So it's really important that we don't do just one of those things. We have to do both portions of what it says in that sentence. We're going to make them accountable for doing what we want them to do, but we do also need to keep checking in on how it is that they are doing. And let me give you a good example of this. Recently, one of my new Kickstarters was given a task of creating some letters that we're going to be sending out to schools in September. And she really felt like she had understood the job completely, and she was being very independent and responsible, and cracked on and printed out, let's say, 50 letters. And then I just happened to look over her shoulder at the letters and say, that's not how you start a letter. And when you start a letter to a head teacher, as I'm sure those of you that are parents know, or you remember from school, you always address teachers by Mrs. whatever their name is, or Mr. whatever their name is. And she was putting their first name into the letters, which was not how we would traditionally address a teacher. Now, what had happened in that situation was that my employee had taken full responsibility and accountability for the job, but I hadn't quickly enough checked in on how they were doing. And if I'd have checked in on how they were doing sooner, I could have spotted the errors and then got her back on a better track with things. So it's really important that, as well as making your employees accountable, you do still have to check in on them and make sure that they are sticking to the instructions or the frameworks that you've given them, because it's easy for them to maybe get into a pattern or just to get confident, and then sway slightly away from the directions that you'd given them. But if they're feeling confident, they won't realize that because they won't go back and double check things along the way. So it needs us to kind of keep that rudder in place for them and make sure that they're following whatever directions we give them. Do deliver appraisals, and part of your appraisal is so that you can share your observations and where you think they could perhaps do things differently, or where they could be doing more than they're doing already. But ask them what else they think they could or can do. Once they've spent some time within your organization, they're going to start seeing the jobs that other people do in that organization. And they might start to think, actually, I could probably do that, or that looks quite enjoyable or interesting in some way. So if you want your employees to be more independent and responsible, give them opportunities to be able to do that by asking them what else they would like to do, or ways in which they think that the organization could develop or change. Ask for their input and their ideas. And finally, make sure they are aware of the ramifications of them not taking responsibility. Like, what is that going to look like for them? Do they know what your disciplinary processes are within your organization, how that's structured, and the steps that you take? Are they reminded of that? If you notice that they're not doing what they should be doing, or they're not taking as much responsibility as they could be, when you do your appraisals, are they made aware again and reminded that there is this framework in place that we follow as an organization? If you are not working to the standard that we would like you to, or you're not taking on the responsibilities that you have already been given and agreed to, then there are going to be ramifications from doing that. And actually, this is the final one on this slide. So trust them, even when you're not ready to do it yet. And I say that one through gritted teeth, because I think that that is one of the more challenging things to do. And this is one that I personally, sometimes I have to just sort of bite my fist and walk away. What I'm saying here is that there's going to come a point where you need to stop helicoptering and swooping in and saving them and directing them. And actually, even though you might be about to watch a car crash in slow motion, you might just need to step back and watch the car crash in slow motion. Because sometimes people learn best when they're given the room to make mistakes. Sometimes they learn best when they're given the room to be confused and to figure out their own problems. I notice that if I help people too fast, they don't remember what it was that I did to help them. And in my mind, I always think, oh, if I show them this now, next time they'll know. Actually, no. If I do this for them now, next time they'll be lazy and they'll ask me again, because the information hasn't had a chance to embed for them. They didn't go through the pain of learning. They didn't learn anything, they got saved. Sometimes you need to give people the pain of learning in order for the information to really get cemented into their minds. And so that may mean that you need to step back and trust that they're going to do it, even if in the back of your mind, your instincts are saying, oh, I'm not ready to do that just yet. All right, so all of these ones that are coming up on the screen that have got the little asterisks next to them, these are the ones that I'm going to drill down into some extra detailed information and give you some proper strategies around these. And this next one is going to be one of those, giving detailed, constructive feedback. I'm going to give you an actual strategy for giving detailed constructive feedback that you'll be able to take and immediately put into action. Acknowledge publicly when they step up. And the reason why we're going to do it publicly is because other people in the office are going to hear that they're getting praise for something, and it makes everybody kind of, you know, sit up a bit straighter and maybe want to start pitching at that same level and putting in those same levels of effort. So if someone has gone beyond the call of duty, they've taken on a new responsibility, they've worked well in an independent way, make sure everybody hears that praise, because it's going to drop a little thought into everybody's head on an unconscious level, perhaps, that they should be doing the same. Do give them choices. You know, giving people responsibility isn't just about telling them what to do. It's also about giving them the choice not to take the responsibility or not, but more so which responsibilities they would like to have. You have much more chance of getting their buy-in and getting their commitment and having them work independently if you let them choose what responsibilities they're going to take on. Don't solve their problems straight away. That kind of ties in a little bit to what I said on the previous slide there. But it's an easy thing if you know the answers and they don't, for them to turn to you and say, how do I do this? And for you to say, like that. Now, what I notice happening for me when I do that, and I shouldn't be, is that my own work gets fragmented and I end up with periods of time where I'm perhaps supposed to be doing something that's quite intense, like month end, or, you know, something that requires a good degree of concentration. I end up with what I then refer to as time confetti, which is where I have a little bit of time to do something here, and then I have an interruption, and then I get another little bit of time to get my head into something, but then I get another interruption. And in order for me to minimize those interruptions, it's not on my employees. This is where I have to take responsibility for training them to solve the problem instead of coming to me, even though I've probably got the answer on the tip of my tongue and could tell them in about 3 seconds. So instead of me jumping in and doing that for them, I have had to teach and remind myself consistently that the question I respond to them with is, where do you think you can find the answer to that, if not me? So if we're not going to use me for the answer, where else can you find the answer to that question? Now, obviously, if I know that I know the answer to the question, then I'm going to need to tell them. But what I've been working toward doing during the period of time that I've employed people is to make sure that every time something new happens, or we design a particular strategy, or we use a new piece of software, that there is some form of training available to them about that, whether it's in a video where there's maybe been even something like this, where there's been a screen recording, whether it's notes that are written down for them, whether it's an audio that they can listen to that talks them back through the instructions, or whether I'm saying to them, do you think Google's got the answer to that? Does it need me? Do you think YouTube has the answer to that? Does it need me? So don't solve their problems straight away. Free yourself up from taking that responsibility so you can focus on what you're doing as an employer, and give them that ability to be able to go, I've got a problem, how do I solve it, rather than I've got a problem, who's going to solve it for me? Do involve them in planning and dream building, because people that are inspired and excited are going to enjoy the responsibilities that they've got. And that means they're probably going to work harder, put more energy into what they do, enjoy their jobs more, and actually have a lot more commitment towards you and your organization. So when it comes to, you know, big picture stuff, thinking about new strategies for the business or projects that you're going to be working on, or even how to solve problematic situations within the organization, sometimes it can be really useful, rather than telling them this is what we're going to do, is to find out what do they think that you should do, and really get them involved in the planning and dream building. the really useful thing about doing that as well is that they see your organization from a very different perspective to what you do, not just because they're new, but because of their position within it. And that means that sometimes they're going to have more of an outside looking in perspective rather than an inside looking out perspective on what the challenges are. And so the ideas that they come up with could actually be really, really helpful for you. You know, they could be not just perhaps a bit more creative, but maybe something more in alignment to what your customers or your clients might say, because they're on the outside looking in still. So definitely get them involved in the dream building and the planning, even if you've got an idea of what it is you need to do and where it is that you need to go already. Get their feedback on it and see what stuff they come up with, because it's going to make them feel much more part of the fabric of the organization if you involve them in those things. And similarly, ask them for advice, even if you don't need it, because again, they might actually wow you and come up with something that's actually really useful and important for you to know about. They might come up with something that maybe you'd had in the back of your mind, but you weren't too sure if it was too much of a risk or if it was a bit too wacky. You know, if someone else says it, it can make you go, yeah, actually, maybe that is a good idea after all. So get them involved as much as you can, because then they're going to really want to take responsibility for moving things forward, because they'll feel like they're part of it all. All right, so as I mentioned, there were some of those quite practical things that I mentioned there, where some of them had an asterisk next to them, and that I wanted to give you more detail on those particular points. And one of them was timesheets. So the very first thing that I mentioned to you is when our young people come to us on the Kickstart scheme, they may be fresh out of school, college or university, and they have had some form of rota that they have been following that tells them how to operate their lives. We know that that worked well for them, or certainly on the most part, it usually does. If nothing else, it provides a bit of sense of comfort and a safety net. So this is an example of a timesheet that I've got in place for one of my new Kickstarters. And what we've done today as part of the accountability and taking responsibility side of things is to go through it and see which of those unique jobs is he actually doing and which ones has he not yet done this week, even though we're already on the Thursday. So you can see there's some bits there where I've done a green tick, and that's because he's reported to me, yep, I've definitely done those things this week. There are some things that are in green boxes. Those are the things that are either part done or he has not done those things at all. And so after we'd been through that sheet today and looked at it together, I then said, okay, of all of these unique tasks, there were, I think, 18 of them that I had highlighted on there. And of those, there were maybe, what have we got? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 or 8 things that he hasn't done yet this week. So that means in terms of his overall job this week, he's only done 61% of it. Now that's not shockingly bad, given this is someone that's brand new and has only been with me for a few weeks, but it does make me think, okay, we need to make sure that going forward he's managing his time better. Going forward, he is showing up on time in the morning so that he is, you know, has the right amount of time to do everything that he needs to do during the day. Maybe there are things that he's getting stuck on that we need to revisit so that he can speed up in those areas. Maybe some of these things he hasn't done are things that he doesn't like or doesn't understand. So that might be areas that we need to, you know, reasons why we need to revisit those areas. So this is a way for me to check in with my employees and say, are you doing what you're supposed to be doing? And if you're not, how come? And what do you need from me to be able to help you get on a better track in ensuring that those things get completed on a consistent basis? Now, if it turns out that 2 weeks from now, I have provided retraining in these areas, He tells me that he's completely understood these parts of his job. He tells me that, you know, he feels like he's actually really good at managing his time. At that stage, I need to start wondering, okay, what else is going on here? Is this someone who maybe has some challenges with learning or reading or writing? Perhaps there's some areas there that I might need to explore with him. And if we move beyond that, and then it turns into, well, actually, his colleague is telling me that he spends quite a lot of time on his mobile phone, or he's chatting a lot, or he's taking extra long breaks, that's when my policies start to come into play, and they start to then form a backup as to what I need to do next with this employee. And that if it comes to it, we start moving towards disciplinaries instead. All right, so one of the other areas that we had asterisked in those previous slides was around feedback. So we said about making sure that you give consistent, clear feedback, and ideally as quickly as possible. So when you give feedback to someone, it should ideally be within 5 minutes of them having done the thing that they've done. So not 3 weeks later. All right, so we need to be quick with our feedback for it to have optimum value. And this is the structure of how you give feedback. In NLP terms, we refer to this as a feedback sandwich, which is where there is a sandwich on the screen. All right, so we start out by saying, this is what was good. So we're going to reflect on what our employee has just done in the area of feedback that we want to be giving them. What was good about what they have just done? Maybe it was they went into it with the right attitude. They went into it with confidence. They did a portion of the job really well and really successfully, in which case you state specifically what that was. Okay, so give them really rich detail around it. And in addition, use lots of sensory-based language. Remember, everyone has a sensory preference. We may not know what theirs is. So if you give them lots of sensory rich detail in your explanation, it looks to me as if you really got very clear on blah, 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 would suit very nicely for a visual person. I can tell that you really got in touch with how to do this job, and you really got your fingers dirty, getting in the thick of it, doing what you needed to do. That would do well for a kinesthetic person who is a bit more touchy-feely. All right, so we're going to tell them what was good about it. Then the meaty part of our sandwich is what could be even better for next time. Now, here's what we're not doing when we say, here's what could be even better for next time. We're not telling them, this is what you've done wrong. Here's why. When we use a feedback sandwich, we're going to be having the person reflect in their mind on the job that they just did. So they're probably going to see some kind of visual image of what they've just done as you're talking them back through it. If you tell them, this is what you did wrong, in their mind, they're going to visualize themselves doing it wrong again. And that process is called visual rehearsal, which means that, a little bit like in the Olympic program, where you have your athletes imagining throwing the perfect javelin throw. They see it in their minds, and you know, sometimes you even see them at the Olympics kind of standing on the edge of whatever they're about to do, and they'll close their eyes and they're doing, it looks like they're doing some weird meditation. Well, actually they're doing visual rehearsal in those moments. They're imagining doing the perfect javelin throw or the perfect relay or whatever their thing is. They're seeing it in their mind. And that visual rehearsal is super powerful, because when you do that in your head, your brain gets in touch with all the parts of your body that you will be using when you come to do that thing. And it gets in touch with all the emotions you'd be experiencing when you do that thing. And so for our athletes, they're going to be imagining perfection, so that they get in touch with all the right parts of their body and feel all the right feelings. If we say to our employee, here's what you did terribly wrong, in their visual rehearsal, they're going to be seeing themselves doing it terribly wrong again, so that they feel all the feelings that they felt and practice using all the parts of their body and running the sequence of doing it terribly wrong, which is not going to be useful for us in the future when we want them to do it differently. So instead, we always state it as, here's what you could do even better next time. And we tell them how to do it perfectly rather than highlighting where they got it wrong. I hope that makes sense, because it's a really important distinction, is to say, here's how to do it well, rather than here's how you did it incorrectly. And then finally, we finish off with overall, this is what you did great. So we kind of wrap it up with a positive on the other side, partly because sometimes the meaty part of our sandwich might be very, very meaty. And also because when we hear positives, we're more likely to process the information and listen. So that's why we're sandwiching the improvements between two positive pieces of bread, is because our employee is much more likely to listen and take on board what we say. We've all had the experience of someone coming to us and saying, you didn't do that well, and immediately you feel resistance towards them. Maybe you feel offended or upset about it, and it makes you less likely to want to tune in and listen because you're perhaps too busy internally defending yourself. Whereas when we use the feedback sandwich and we put those two pieces of positive bread around the really important stuff that we want to say, there's much more chance that they're going to listen to it and take it in. All right, so we talked a little bit earlier about multimedia approaches as well. And I explained about how we all have different styles for learning and taking in information based on our sensory preferences. So here are just some ideas to build on what was said there. So show and tell, literally show them and tell them what you're doing as you are doing it. Videos, like these days, it's super, super easy to do a screen recording on your computers. I'm a Mac user, so I just hit QuickTime, go screen record, and I will voice over and talk through different bits and pieces that I'm doing on my computer, and then I save the file. It does take up quite a lot of space if you keep it on your local computer. So I use, you could use something like Dropbox, for example. I use Amazon S3, which is a place where you can upload different pieces like documents and data and videos and things. And then you just get a link that you can then share with people. So videos are a great way of teaching. Deductive learning. All right, so that's going to be the opposite of inductive learning. So with inductive learning, you tell people what to do. With deductive learning, you go, here's a problem, off you go. I really like deductive learning because I think that that's when people really remember stuff, because they've had to go through the pain of figuring it out. It's much more likely to stick in their heads rather than when you just tell them. However, people can get quite frightened of deductive learning because there is, of course, the risk that they'll either get it wrong or they might really mess something up. So make sure that you give them parameters to, be able to make mistakes and know that that's okay, or to be able to come back with the wrong answer and know that that's okay. And don't do what I did, which is, giving people access to the mainframe of your website where things can accidentally get deleted. All right, observe. So get them observing you, observing others, or even just observing stuff, observing a YouTube videos like this, for example, so that they can learn that way instead. Of course, practice makes perfect. So you and your employees need to remember that Rome was not built in a day. There is some stuff they're going to pick up quicker than other stuff, sometimes because it's stuff they enjoy more, sometimes because it's similar to something they already know, sometimes because it's something that they have to do 4 times a day instead of once a week. So some things they're going to wrap their heads around more quickly than others. And make sure that you do use tests and assessments so that you know where they're up to with their learning, like where did they get to already and what gaps are still there. There is only so much that you can really assess from a conversation with them about it. So for example, I showed you that timesheet a little earlier, where there are some things that for my employee, he is not yet on top of getting those things done. And yet if I asked him if he knew how to do them, he might say yes. Actually, if I created a situation where he was being tested, or he had to bring the work to me for me to assess it afterwards, I might come to a different conclusion. So make sure that you don't just take someone's word for it in knowing what they do. Make sure that you have some means of testing and assessing them so that you can be really sure that they've understood what they're supposed to be doing. All right, and in one of these previous webinars that I did around the Kickstart, I think I was talking about attitudes in employees and how to sort of manage different personalities in the workplace. One of the things that I talked about on that particular webinar is how we all have different, what we refer to in NLP as meta programs. And these are like very deep level values. For some people, they are more motivated by the rewards that they can get and what they're going to be moving toward. And other people are more driven and motivated by avoiding getting in trouble, being in pain, and the things that they want to really get away from. So we refer to those meta programs as toward and away from. So towards is the goals and the good stuff, away from is the pain and the bad stuff. So a bit like we're all familiar with the metaphor of a carrot versus a stick to get your donkey moving. This works in the same way. Now, for some of your employees, you will be able to get them chomping at the bit of wanting to take responsibility by giving them lots of carrots and lots of reasons to move toward doing that. So lots of positive outcomes from doing so. With other employees, you are going to motivate them towards being independent and taking more responsibility by use of a stick. And that means that we are going to be using the application of pain to get them doing what we want them to do. And for other people, it's going to be a little bit of both. They'll need both the carrot and knowledge that the stick is there in order to keep them taking that responsibility, to keep them motivated, and to have them take more independence in what they are doing. So let's talk about some carrot ways in which we can get our employees taking responsibility. Number one is give them expert status. Everybody loves an extra little plaque on their desk or an extra line on their business card or something that says they are the in-house expert on whatever. So let's say that you in your company have a real need to wrap your head around Instagram. Because your Instagram status is tanking and you are not getting enough engagement there, and you would love to have more business coming from your Instagram account. Speak to your Kickstarters to see who perhaps has good Instagram knowledge already. I was just wondering,
yung...
Jenny, are you able to just put that on? All right, just let me so yeah, expert status could be the way to go. Thank you so much for getting someone to take more responsibility in their work. That means that they need to go off, do the learning, and be responsible for teaching and advising others, or that becomes their specific role within the organization. And you refer to them as your Instagram expert within the organization. The next one is to feature them on a leaderboard. So some ways in which responsibility can be cultivated is with a bit of good old-fashioned competition. So if you have a way in which you can measure what your employees are doing or how successful they are being, or just how much they're doing and achieving in their job, then featuring them on some kind of a leaderboard where they can measure themselves against others and visually see where they are might be a way for them to get more motivation to feel that they want to take on more responsibilities. The next one is start with the fun stuff. So if you have people in your organization that you need to take on more responsibility, don't give them the heavy stuff straight away. It might completely scare them off. Instead, make them responsible for the next work outing. Make them responsible for organizing Joe's birthday party. Give them something fun where it's almost like they would never say no to it. Make it something easy and enjoyable so that it's an easy yes for them to take that responsibility. And then when they've done it and they've been successful, you give them all the praise for having done it and say, now let's take your responsibility up to the next level and give them something more important to do. And give them freedom, all right? So I showed you my timesheet there earlier. However, there is freedom within that. All of the tasks have to get done, but I actually don't care on what days and in which order they do them, as long as it works. So give them that flexibility to feel like they can pick and choose, so that they can perhaps decide they want to take their lunch break at a different time, if that works within your organization, and then they can spend a bit more time focusing on something, or they can have a longer afternoon to be able to really knuckle down and do it. So give them the flexibility and freedom as much as you can, so that they really start to feel like it's not just being responsible for the jobs that they do, but also how they then put those into action. Okay, and then we have our stick. So part of helping employees to be more responsible might mean that at times we are driving them not with rewards, but actually more on the side of consequences. So do use your policies. You should all have policies in place around your procedures for if someone isn't working up to standard. Does it start with a chat? Does it move to a verbal warning, written warning? How many hoops do people need to jump through before, you know, certain actions are taken that might eventually mean that they exit from your company? Now, hopefully you never actually get to that stage, but certainly reminding people that those exist and that you do follow those procedures is going to be important for them to know about, so that they continue to take their job seriously. It might be that you have offered to put a certain bonus in place if particular things happen, certain responsibilities are taken and certain goals are met. Well, if those responsibilities are not taken and those goals are not met, then you don't give them the bonus, all right? So make sure that if it comes to it, if someone isn't working to the standard that you both agreed was what was required, if they then don't meet those standards, they don't get their bonuses that were promised to them. And likewise with promotions, if you had promised someone a promotion on the basis of them doing X, Y, and Z, if they then don't take responsibility for getting X, Y, and Z done, don't still give them the promotion, because otherwise you're losing your leverage, which you might need in the future. So if you want to keep them responsible, hold back the things that you'd promised and only give those things if they are doing what they were required to do in order to achieve them. Do set deadlines, all right? So you can apply pressure and, quite frankly, a little bit of stress on your employees by having deadlines in place for them. People actually function better when there is a degree of stress. So I'm not talking about stressing people out completely, but certainly feeling as if there is some stress and pressure. And the other benefit is, and something that my own employees report to me, is that when there is more to do, their day goes faster because they feel the pressure of needing to get the work done. And make sure that they know that if it came to it, you can let them go. So taking on responsibilities is going to be something that's really important for them to do, because ultimately the future of their job might depend upon it. All right, so some final bits from me are that there is more good content that you can reach out to me and access via my YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/people building. It is not necessarily employee and employer exclusive. There's lots of different types of mental health and emotional well-being and just general self-development and functioning in life videos and tips and things that go on there, and there is also a link to the audio version of that podcast too. The most recent one actually just went out yesterday, and it was all about secondary gain. So that's quite an interesting subject when it comes to a workplace environment, because sometimes we have people who say they can't do things because the benefit means that they avoid something they maybe didn't want to do, or they get more time off sick, or all sorts of other things. So that one's actually quite a relevant one for employers, and that one went live yesterday if you'd like to go and check it out. You can also reach out to me via gemma@peoplebuilding.co.uk if you have any other questions that you want to raise in respect of your Kickstarters or taking on new employees, how to support people with their mental and emotional well-being in the workplace, or if you would like to find out more about the support that we provide to organisations where your employees can reach out for unlimited free consultations at any point in time, then please reach out to me to find out more about that. But for now, that is everything. Thank you all so much for being here with me today.
Thank you very much indeed, Gemma. It was absolutely fascinating. Does anyone have any questions for Gemma before we close the session? If you'd prefer to put them in the chat box, then that's perfectly fine.
Let me just bring that over so I can see it as well. There we go.
Yeah.
I've been in this situation before where I've gone, nope, nobody has any questions, and then someone's really typing frantically in the background.
Yeah, yeah. And I thought we'd leave it a little bit longer just in case anyone's typing frantically. But yes.
What I will do, Jenny, as well, is I will send you over the PDF document of these slides very shortly, and then you can send those out to everybody as well.
Yeah, that would be lovely. Yes, I'll be sending those out this evening, I would imagine, the slides and the recording as well, once that's finished rendering.
Perfect.
So it's not looking as though we've got any questions at the moment, so I think we should just be okay to wrap that up now. Once again, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. I found it really interesting, and I look forward to your next one.
Thank you very much. Lovely to see you all. Thanks for coming.
Thank you so much.